It's time for another Dice Tower review with Randy White and Mark Streed.
Hello folks, welcome to Board Game Corner and our obligatory Cthulhu episode. I'm Mark.
And I'm Randy, and today we're reviewing Unspeakable Words, a game from Playroom Entertainment that plays 2 to 6 players, ages 10 and up, in about 30 minutes. Unspeakable Words is a push-your-luck game with a little bit of spelling involved. Think of it as the unholy love child of zombie dice and Scrabble.
And it was also a featured episode for Will Wheaton on Tabletop. So let's take a look at it. Let's head to the table.
In Unspeakable Words, you are intrepid researchers, unearthing words man was never meant to spell. The object of the game is to be the first to reach 100 points worth of words, without going insane, that is. You have 5 Cthulhus that represent your sanity points. As you spell words and roll against the point value, you may retain or lose these sanity points. Every player is given 7 cards to start with, and as you play words, you draw back up to 7. For your turn, you'll take a look at your cards and determine what words you can spell. In this case, we're going to spell cheap. So hold back 2, and you will play the word cheap on your turn. Now there are point values on your cards. The way the points are calculated is based on the angles of each of the letters. So C would have a 0 point value. In this case, we're spelling cheap, which is worth 16 points. And we roll against that to see if we maintain our sanity. And hopefully we will. And we have decided that as a house rule, this dice is far too insignificant. So now we have incorporated our own larger green, in fact, Cthulhu dice. Still 20-sided, obviously. And we roll against this, and in my case, I fail my roll. Now, I still get the points for this, but I lose a sanity, so my Cthulhu runs away and hides. Now, of course, your goal is to keep scoring points to reach that 100-point limit. Now, if I was on the edge of reaching 100 points and I spelled cheap and I rolled a 7, I would not get those points, and I would fail my roll, not only lose a sanity, but I would not make my 100 points. So once your word is spelled, you put it in the discard pile, and then you draw back up to 7 cards. Like so. And we'll take a little closer look at the artwork here in a minute, but that's the basic of the game. You go around, and everyone plays words and rolls against sanity, and you have to either make your value, the point value of your word, you have to roll it or higher. Now there's some extended rules that you can apply for more challenging games, but we'll talk about those in a little bit. But that's really the basic of the game. You want to hold on to your sanity and reach 100 points. Now, the really neat aspect is once you roll down to a single Cthulhu, you are considered insane. So now you can pretty much spell any word you can think of. And throughout this entire process of playing words, the game encourages you to play or to have descriptions, fun, witty descriptions of your words. But the only time we enforce it as a house rule is when you're insane. You have to have a good description for your insane word. It's just more fun that way. So you can spell anything. Again, we try to keep it to 3 letters. But, you know, if you're insane, you really don't need 3 letters. So it's another probably house rule. The rules do not state that, but that's how we play.
So here's a quick look at some of the artwork. C is for Cthulhu, E is for Elder Thing, and all the cards have some sort of messaging related to Cthulhu. The artwork is very whimsical, kind of a fun look, maybe a little more family-friendly for Cthulhu. Definitely some nice artwork here, though. We won't look at all of it, but this is just a glimpse into some. Now, there's some optional rules, advanced rules, if you will, to make the game a little more interesting. We'll cover some of those here. One of the things that you can do in the game, which we didn't talk about before, was if you run up against the wall and you can't really spell a word, well, then you have the option of discarding your whole hand, basically skipping your turn and allowing you to draw 7 new cards. A couple of optional rules that play into that are spellbinding and psychotherapy. Spellbinding prevents the player from just discarding and drawing. The other players in the game can look at their hand, and if there are other words that could be spelled, the player is forced to use those. And if there are multiple words, they're forced to use the highest point value word. Psychotherapy is a nice addition as well, because what it does is it allows the player who's discarding their hand to take the total point value, roll against it, and potentially recover a lost sanity point or Cthulhu. Hardcore is an interesting rule. So if you roll the exact value of your word, you fail your sanity check. So you have to roll higher than the total word value. The last optional rule is last words. We play with this one all the time. Once a player reaches 100 points or more, each other player gets one more turn in which they can seize the opportunity to try and beat that score. And a tie is not a valid way to win. So, in other words, it's not enough to simply tie for high score. A player must beat it in order to win.
Now, as you can see from Mark's demo of the game, this is a very straightforward game to teach as well as to learn. Basically consists of forming words from your hand and rolling the dice to try to get a number higher than the value of the word you scored. There's a certain degree of trying to decide whether you're going to be very risky and play high-value words or play it safe and score low-value words, but still there's a chance, even with low-value words, that the dice won't be your friend. But ultimately, it's easy for people of all ages, or at least 10 plus, to learn and to pick up quickly and enjoy the game.
There's definitely an element of push your luck as well.
There is.
Which I find really fun. And as a group, I think the group enjoys as well.
Right. Now, you also saw the artwork and the components in the game. The artwork is not as complex or dramatic as other Lovecraft-based card games like Call of Cthulhu, for example, but it's not intended to be. It's really meant to be reminiscent of the pictures around the top of your nursery school that said A is for apple, B is for ball, C is for cat, although in this case it's C is for Cthulhu. These images are, as Mark said, whimsical, they're light, that allows younger people to play the game without being afraid of these creatures that are according to stories, might be consuming them in the while they're asleep or eating their soul or something like that. So you don't have to explain any of that to the kids. They just look like play monsters, maybe from Sesame Street. But even though the artwork is simple, it is very appropriate for the theme, very creative. The little Cthulhus are well done.
Yes, very.
So that's a plus. Mark also pointed out the fact that the dice is a little bit small. If anything, I would have liked to have seen a larger dice in the game. I think that would have contributed to it, and the box would have allowed that.
Yeah, and that was one of the first things we upgraded right away. And the group and everybody we play with loves the large dice.
Yeah.
It really just adds a little more to it. And again, with the artwork, I like the whimsical nature of it, the cartoony feel, and the kids love it. It makes it much more family friendly.
Definitely. Now, I'm not a huge fan of push-your-luck games. I prefer games where strategy comes into play a little bit more. So games like Zombie Dice, although I like them occasionally, 1 or 2 rounds before we get into something serious, they're not something I'm really drawn to. One of the things I notice about Unspeakable Words is that it's more than just push your luck. You have a chance of tilting the odds in your favor a bit, because it's not just the dice that you're at the mercy of. You have a chance of choosing a variety of tactical options. You can choose to spell very low-value words, in which case, statistically, you'll have a greater chance of the dice value being higher and you retaining your sanity, whereas other people might choose to go out and spell very high-value words, hoping the dice will favor them.
Yeah, and that's where I like to play. I come out with both barrels blazing, so I like to blow through those big points right away and lose 2 to 3 Cthulhu up front just to get a leap out in front of everybody else. But I have to admit, some of my favorite part is getting down to that last Cthulhu, right?
And technically, this is where the theme's a little bit challenging. I grew up with reading Lovecraft and Poe and similar authors, and Cthulhu should not be a representation of sanity. One thing that could have been done differently is that instead of the little Cthulhus, if you really wanted them to represent sanity, you might have little brains, and as you lose your sanity, you lose those brains. Or, for purists, even with the game as it is, they could start with 0 Cthulhus, and as they lose the rolls, they get additional Cthulhus, and when they get to 5, they lose. In fact, for real purists and people who are into the theme, you could take a little piece of paper, draw a pentagram, and as you get each new Cthulhu, you place it on one of the vertices of the pentagram, and when you get all 5, you summon in some sort of great elder one,
right.
and you're dead. So purists do have that option.
Okay, so the insanity piece is what I enjoy the most, I think.
Yeah.
So getting down to the last Cthulhu and being able to make up any word you can think of. It doesn't have to be a real word, it could be anything. And again, there is the 3-character limit, you know, but I still think that if you're insane, that shouldn't really be a thing.
Yeah.
So that push your luck bit there, trying to hold on at that last sanity point is really what pulls me into the game the most.
Yeah, if you want to spell, you're down there at your last Cthulhu and you're insane, and if you want to spell BGC and say that's the sound of an exploding pig, have at it. You know,
exactly.
And to me, that's what makes the Lovecraftian theme of this, even though it's not a heavy theme by any means, it's a very light theme, but
yeah, very much.
But this is what defends it, in my opinion, and makes it prevents it from being totally interchangeable, because the insanity concept is so tied to the Lovecraftian mythos and the stories in the universe there that it really makes sense. It says, okay, this is a Cthulhu game. This is about going crazy. And for those of you who are old enough to remember the game Alone in the Dark,
yes,
there was a point in the game where you'd find a book, the Necronomicon, and if you read it outside of the pentagram, you'd open it up, and all of a sudden you'd see your character's body lifted in the air and twisted in half and falling lifeless to the ground. And so this concept of losing sanity as you read these unspeakable words really fits with this. It's not a heavy theme. You're not finding yourself immersed, but I feel like it's not just something that's a thin veneer on top of some basic game mechanics.
Now, player uptime, I think it varies, you know, based on who's playing the game and how fast they can come up with words.
Right.
My youngest struggles with that a little bit, but I like applying pressure. Said, "Oh, you better hurry! You're gonna run out of sanity." You know, just add some flavor to the game to push her on that. You know, so but I think in general, uptime is pretty quick. You know, we move around the cards move around pretty quick. I think where it takes most time is, hey, you need to draw more cards before you go.
Yeah.
You know, so that's it's definitely a nice feel. There's not a lot of wait between turns.
Right. There's no interaction between players as such.
Right.
So when it's not your turn, you're really just mulling over what words to spell. But turns aren't very long, so you get around the table fairly quickly.
Replayability is, I think, fairly high. We found that in groups, it's a great warm-up game before we get into anything deep. And it's just a fun light game for just if you don't have a lot of time to play. And everybody engages pretty well with it.
I agree with that. It's when I mentioned the fact that I'm not a big fan of push-your-luck games, and although I'm okay with zombie dice, a game or two, I think this game is one that if I had to choose between, I'd probably choose Unspeakable Words over
I
zombie
would too,
dice.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it does have replayability, especially if you're looking for a game for a larger group, because it plays up to 6 players, as well as something that's a good intro to other games. Now, for me, it's a solid, light filler game, and that's why I personally give it a solid 3 corners out of 4.
Yep, I have to agree. I find it very enjoyable. There are aspects that I wish were a little different, but you know, I think overall it's a really fun game. The kids like it. The whole family gets into it. I even got my parents to play it. So I definitely give it a strong 3 out of 4 corners.
Yeah. And if you have friends who are into the Lovecraft mythology, I think it makes a great gift for them. There's a lot of games out there, and it seems like you can't swing a dead squid without hitting one of them. But this is one that, if you're looking for something a little bit lighter and quicker, this is one that would make a good gift.
Yep, definitely. I agree.
Occasionally at the end of our reviews, we'll mention a game that we're watching on Kickstarter. This is not only to draw attention to that game, but also to encourage those of you who haven't visited Kickstarter to go there and see the great ideas that are being cultivated.
This week we are watching a game called Albion's Legacy. It's a heavily themed Arthurian legend game. Co-op, 1 to 4 players, and a modular board. So if you want to find out more about it, look at the link below. Also, this week we have a couple shout-outs we want to give. Our new ratings graphic was developed by Chris Richardson of Push IQ. Thanks again, Chris. It looks great.
We also want to give a shout out to our viewers. Thank you so much for all the feedback you've given. We really do appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Board Game Corner. We'll be back again with another review soon, but in the meantime, we will
See you at the table!
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.